Hello and welcome everyone to the Riverfront Red Show. We are part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network, and we have some things to talk about today. And helping me do that is the familiar face, the Podfather himself, Mr. Bill Lack. Bill, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Nate. How are you today?
Man, I can't complain, and nobody wants to hear about it if I could.
This is true.
Bill, it's nice to have some news. It's been a rough second half of the season, and we got some stuff to go over. It was super fun getting to listen to Tim and Ben on Sunday night's Late Night Red Show come back on when they got the breaking news that, of course, David Bell has been fired, Mumbalina himself. And I can't really think of a better place to start unless you have anything else you want to get off your chest.
Well, I am in mourning for the loss of the Ohio Cup.
Oh, you know what? That's a good point. We should discuss the Ohio Cup.
No, we
tragedy.
We shouldn't.
A modern day tragedy. The Reds lose the cherished battle for the Ohio Cup to the Cleveland Guardians. I guess there's a few things to talk about there. Did you see those T-shirts that Cleveland had made?
And our friend Joe Farsing said, "Well, that's not an insult, and I don't live in Kentucky, so I can tell you, yes, it is an insult."
For those who somehow don't know, after Cleveland clinched holding on to the cup for another year, they celebrated in the locker rooms and had T-shirts made that said Cincinnati is in Kentucky. And I got to tell you, people online were upset about this. Reds fans were in their feelings, and I thought it was hilarious.
That's because you don't live here.
Hey, I lived on the border of Kentucky, so I get the joke.
It's funny, though, because my wife, when we first met, she lived in Kentucky. She worked downtown and lived in Kentucky. And she used to piss people off because she always called it South Cincinnati.
I thought it was pretty funny. And they, they've been in first place all year, pretty much. It's a long 162 game slog. You got to have some fun. However you can, whatever you got to do. I saw people like there was an interview earlier in the year where Hunter Greene said that we don't even think about the Ohio Cup. Well, maybe that attitude is why David Bell got fired, because other teams are finding ways to care a little more and keep it going, keep it exciting in the clubhouse. I thought it was fantastic what they did.
I'm not. I can start out by saying I don't like interleague play to begin with.
That's fair. That's fair. So, I just saw all these people on Reds, Twitter and everywhere else being like, "Oh, we're not even real rivals. This doesn't matter." And yeah, the Ohio Cup doesn't matter, but winning is fun and celebrating wins is fun. I didn't think the NBA in-season tournament was going to be a thing, and that was a ton of fun last year. So do whatever you can to get motivated. And if the shoe had been on the other foot, I think we would have been having a pretty good time with it.
We would have. I think that's true. The thing is, to me, is traditionally this year they played well against good teams.
Yeah,
except against the Indians, against the Indian Guardians, the
Indian Guardians. The Guardians and the Brewers, it seemed like, just had their number all year.
Well, the Brewers have had their number for years, so
Yeah, true that. The only other thing we should talk about from that series is TJ Friedl lays down a bunt with a perfect game going in the 6th inning last night against the Guardians, and Cleveland was not happy about that. What's your take on that bunt, Bill? You're an old school guy. You're a fan of the unwritten rules.
It's baseball, and for one thing, I don't know if I'd feel different if they'd have been down 8-0, 7-0, 10-0. Yeah. I don't know if I'd have felt different. They were only down 2-0 at the time. So he gets on base, a home run, the ball game's tied, and you don't want him to bunt and to break up your no-hitter, then field the bunt and throw it out.
Yeah.
When you look up statistics and you do your batting average, a bunt single counts the same as a line drive single.
That is one point that I wanted to make. It was that TJ Friedl is going to hit free agency one day. So every little thing that makes his baseball card look a little bit better matters to him. And he's not a guy that never bunts. He's one of the most prolific bunt for base hit guys in Major League Baseball, who is trying to get more money in arbitration And yeah, I agree. If they've been down a ton, yeah, maybe don't do it. But even so, as long as it was TJ Friedel doing it, I don't have a problem. I would have had a bigger problem if Luke Maley tried to lay down a bunt. Sure, maybe that's a little bit, maybe we're having a different conversation. But also, if you're going to celebrate the Ohio Cup with champagne and cigars and T-shirts, maybe don't turn around the next day and get mad at teams trying to win baseball games.
Right. And much ado about nothing. It's much ado about nothing. It's all of these little one-game controversy bullshit things are during the course of the season.
It was mostly people on Twitter being mad, which is what people on Twitter typically do. And then the Guardians social media accounts were having some fun. It's like classic Cincinnati or classic Kentucky Reds move right there. And I think they were just trying to get a rise out of Reds fans, which again, they succeeded.
Yep. That's what their job is, I reckon.
Yeah. All right, let's get into why we're here.
Okay.
David Bell is no longer manager of your Cincinnati Reds and mine. They fired Mumbalina with 5 games to go in the regular season. Bench coach Freddie Benavidez has taken over as the interim manager. Bell had a 4.09 and 4.56 record leading the Reds, and Nick Krall said, amongst other things, that David provided the kind of steadiness that we needed in our clubhouse over the last few seasons. We felt a change was needed to move the major league team forward. We have not achieved the success that we expected, and we need to begin focusing on 2025. So, first question, do you think it was the right move?
Yeah, I mean, I've never been a David Bell fan from day one. I probably gave him more rope than a lot of people, mainly because Matt Klinker was a big fan of his. He managed Matt in the minor leagues, and Matt thought the world of him. But he made moves that it left me scratching my head at times. But whether he's a bad manager, or whether he's an average manager in the major leagues, I think we've all said it. There's probably 5 really, really good managers and 5 really, really bad managers, and the rest of them are in a big glob in the middle.
Yeah.
I was looking at Joe Torre's record, and did he become a great manager when he became, all of a sudden become a great manager when he went to the Yankees, or was he finally have some guys that could play?
Yeah, did he have somewhere around 7 Hall of Famers in the lineup at any given time?
When he was managing the Braves, he was the same guy, or when he was managing the Mets, he was the same guy that was managing the Yankees. I don't think a combination of Casey Stengel, John McGraw, and Sparky Anderson could have made this team a winner. There are too many holes, too many injuries. Now, some of the things that have been talked about that need to be addressed on this team, a different manager might have been able to take care of those. The lack of discipline on the field, the boneheaded mistakes, but a lot of the stuff too sounds like the contact play, running it again and again and again and again, getting thrown out. That's coming from the bench. That's not guys making decisions on the field. So
it's worth noting that Jeff, what's his name, Pickler, also got fired, who is the bench coach, and he's the guy who makes out all the lineups and everything, allegedly. It seems like to me the recurring theme, and this was with what Nick Krall said in his press conference and what you've heard from a lot of the players, and we're going to get to some of their comments shortly. The accountability thing and the lack of fundamentals and discipline that we talked about all season long was on everybody's mind.
Well, and I brought this up a couple of times. The promos that they did on Bally Sports, where they talked about Bell and they talked about what a good guy he is, and that he doesn't call you out in front of everybody, and he blah blah blah. You never got the sense, even from the players themselves, during the course of the season, in what were supposed to be PR, advertisements. You never got the sense that there was any accountability. That anybody ever got called. And I'm not saying you get in the media and have to rip some guy in the media, even though it could come to that. But, and God forbid, I agree with Barry Larkin, but he said, a while back, and I think we talked about it on here. Ellie did something dumb one night. He got thrown out at third base on a really bad play. And Barry said, I want him to continue to play with that level of, furor, that looseness. But somebody needs to ask him, what did you see that make you think you were going to be able to get that base? And you never got the feeling that those kind of conversations were happening because they kept making the same mistakes again and again and again.
Yeah, and they were still making them as early as last night's game. So this is something that was weighing on everyone, particularly the front office, it seems, because I think we were all surprised that he did get fired just because he had another year or two on his deal and they have to eat that money. But this leads to the next question. Is David Bell the scapegoat for bigger issues? Dave Magram from our Patreon family said, do the Castellinis really think we're going to see this as an all-around solution? I think they made the moves to take the heat off of their butts. And I think there's a whole lot of truth in that. We can sit there and think that David Bell did such a poor job that the Reds needed a new voice. And that's where I land. I think that for what this team needs going forward, he's not the guy. Maybe he was the guy to get them to where they got last year, but his time is up. But a new manager, no matter who it is, and there's some interesting names out there, does not change the fact that 2 seasons ago, this team was in first place at the trade deadline and did virtually nothing. Shout out Sam Maul. This year, they couldn't decide whether they wanted to buy or sell on a team that was hovering around 500, perplexing the players. Jonathan India making comments in the media at the time about how strange it was. There is no manager that's going to make the Reds suddenly either spend money, which they've spent money in the past, so like that can happen, but spend it well on the right players and truly try to build a contender. We have no reason to believe that they will. I hope that they will. I would love to be wrong. I would love nothing more. But I certainly believe that there's a big element of David Bell as the scapegoat right now. What do you think?
I think you're right. Carl, talks about accountability, and is there going to be accountability for the front office? We know there's not going to be any accountability to ownership. I mean, look, they took a guy that basically stuck his thumb in the fans' eye last year and promoted him to the head of the franchise. So the accountability discussion doesn't go as high as it needs to go, but we all know that. And the other thing, talking about spending money, what was the first thing Carl talked about this week, though? We're always going to be a small market team.
We're always going to be a small market team. He got in front of that real quick. He was like, do not let this be a signal. Do not let this be a signal that we are going to suddenly turn over a new leaf or whatever. It's like, no, we're going to be the exact same, but just with a different guy. And it was all his fault.
And it's interesting that the other teams that are in markets that are basically the Reds' same size don't seem to have any trouble winning. Look, take a look at the Milwaukee Brewers.
Look at the Brewers. Look at the Cardinals' history. Look at them at San Diego right now. They're having a lot of fun, and they are not much larger than the Cincinnati market.
No. And they went out and spent a boatload of money last year, and a lot of that. And I don't know where. I haven't looked at the payroll numbers for this year, but I assume they're still way up in payroll, even in the second year. You want to make more revenue, win more ball games. It's a pretty simple concept. And I can
San Diego is the perfect example for that. You can't watch a game in San Diego without it looking like one of the most epic parties you've ever heard of. Every game's sold out. Everyone's losing their minds the whole time. You can't tell me their owners aren't just making bank.
Right.
It's crazy. So we'll see if anything changes. I'm not expecting anything, but Joey Cadizza summed it up. Bell is a mid-manager at best. Joey, also one of our Patreon family members. I certainly won't miss his awful post-game interviews. Me either, Joey. That said, I wish him the best in his next endeavors. Reds need someone to light a fire under them and keep the accountability burning. I don't disagree with a word of that. The timing was interesting, I thought, Bill. Do you have any thoughts on the fact that they fired him with 5 games to go?
I can't figure that one out. It seemed like they did it. Maybe they didn't want to pay for his hotel room on his last road trip. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to fire him this close to the end of the year to me. It doesn't give you a head start on anything. And,
yeah.
and you're not going to give Benavidez, if he's the guy that you really want, you're not going. You should have fired Bell, a month ago. At least then you give 5 weeks of managing. You can see what you think you're going to get.
I think it must have been perhaps because they're going on the road after this. They felt the need to get it done before the Reds were on the road for the rest of the season.
Yeah, but I don't see why.
Know. Maybe they had a conversation. I keep thinking they must have had some conversation internally where it ended with Bell knowing, and they were just like, all right, fine. You're good. Just stay. You're in Cincinnati now. Just stay here. Figure it out. It was strange. It was very strange. And they actually talked to Joe Madden, and Joe Madden said the same thing. He, let me see if I can pull his comments up real quick here, and we'll talk about Joe Madden later because he's being mentioned as a potential candidate. He said the timing of it is really strange. Injuries, everybody has those. Everybody's going to have to win in spite of being injured. Quite frankly, I think what's happening is there's less blame being put on managers these days. Blah, 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 blah. Doesn't matter. So a situation like this tells me there's something about them. They don't like the clubhouse somehow, or that conversation has gotten to the point where they don't like it. More than anything, more than the decision-making, he thinks it's the clubhouse. That something happened internally. Maybe players went to the front office. I have no idea. Purely speculation. But Joe Madden says the timing is strange enough.
The only thing I would say to that, though, is there isn't anybody on this team now that Votto's gone that has held in high enough esteem, that is enough of a veteran, enough and is a good enough ball player that could go to the front office and say, we've got a problem here. Maybe Maley could, but when you're hitting 122 or whatever the hell he's hitting, it's tough to go out there and say you're part of a solution, not part of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a group of guys. The front office seems to be really like India. Maybe India went to somebody.
Well, based on some of his comments that we'll get to, he specifically said that he has talked to the front office about some of the things that he thinks they need to do in the offseason. It wouldn't blow my mind if he was that guy. And I could also see him being the kind of guy that Phil Castellini really rallies around. He looks like the kind of guy that sold Phil Castellini his cocaine in the 80s. I'm not reporting that.
But was it the right move? Probably. The timing is very, very strange. I really thought that they were going to let Bell go after the season, even with 2 years left on his contract. I thought they were going to let him go. The concern here is how much is that going to that outstanding contract going to affect who they try to bring in?
Well, that's going to be part of the calculus for sure, because they are paying him 7 figures to do nothing, and they got to pay the next guy depending on what caliber of manager you want. There's some pretty sexy names out there.
Were the financial terms of his deal announced? Was he making 7 figures?
Or are you just assuming that? I'm just assuming that.
Oh, okay. Because I don't remember ever seeing, what his salary was, and I can't believe it's big money. But
I just feel like every major league manager's got to be making 7 figures these days, right?
I don't know. You're probably right. I have no. The other thing that's going to affect it too, and is the Bally going out of business. And where that ends up landing.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least the Reds will use that as one of their excuses why they couldn't spend any money in the offseason for managers or anyone else.
Right. Well, so long, David Bell. I think I land on the fact that I think it was the right move. It's just not the answer. Don't expect this to be the thing that propels these Reds to great new heights. But I do think it was the right time to get rid of David Bell. The question I have for you now is, as we look to the future, do you think this is an attractive opening for a potential manager?
I think in some ways, yes. In some ways, and before I get off on that, I agree with you. I think David Bell's a good guy. I've never heard anybody say a bad word about him, so I wish him well. But it was time for him to go. Whether it's an attractive opening, I would think with the young talent on this team, I would say absolutely. But having to deal with the Castellinis and and that clown show that's in the front office, if you're a winning major league manager, wouldn't you rather have a job somewhere else where a team has had some kind of success in the last 30 years? I read Lance McAllister put on his thing the other day. The Reds made the playoffs. Was it 6 times in the 70s, and have made the playoffs 6 times since the 70s.
Jeez,
that's not good.
No.
So
let's bring somebody else on here real quick to talk about. We got a surprise guest.
All right. Holy
what's up, guys?
Please welcome to the podcast, Chad Dotson himself, a long-lost co-host and brother.
How you doing, brother?
It's been too long. Good talking to you guys. I got home earlier than I expected, so I decided I'd jump on and surprise you guys. So
that's always.
I assume we're talking about baseball.
We are indeed. You
no, we're talking about the Reds.
Fair.
You hopped on just in time to answer a question. We just finished up talking about the end of the David Bell era. Moving on to the future, do you think, please, by all means, give your thoughts on David Bell being fired, but then do you think this is an attractive opening for prospective managers?
Oh, dear Lord, no. Well, no, I'm gonna qualify that, okay? Because actually it may be the most attractive job for anyone that wants a little bit of what's the word I'm looking for? A safe destination. Because if you think about it, there are, I think, 11 managers who have managed the Reds for 5 seasons, at least 5 seasons. Only 2 of those 11 have losing records. Those 2 are David Bell and Brian Price. This is a managerial job where you get to keep your job even if you lose a lot of games, because winning is not really a part of the job description here. Now, maybe that's changing. I don't know. If you want to take Nick Krall's comments at face value, maybe that's changing. Maybe that's not the case for the next manager. But based on the evidence of the last 10 years, it doesn't really matter whether you win or not. You kind of get to keep your job because the goal has been development or eliminating peaks and valleys or something other than actually being a competitive team. So I don't know. I mean, I don't see some I don't even know who the best manager is in baseball, because I've always said there's a handful of good ones, a handful of bad ones. The rest are all just kind of whatever. The best manager in baseball is not coming here. There's just no way, because why would you? But in one of the other, there are only 30 of these jobs. There'll be a lot of people wanting it.
Well, yeah, that's the first thing I was going to lead off with, is that it's a career track. And this is one of the 30 openings on the planet for the ultimate dream for somebody out there. So they're going to take it. And it's certainly an attractive job if your lifelong dream is to be a major league manager and you haven't gotten that opportunity yet. It's an attractive dream if money's not an option, an attractive goal, and you just love baseball, because you do get the opportunity to coach Ellie De La Cruz, Hunter Greene, and some pretty exciting young talent on the way. And some of it's already here. That kind of makes me think that when they're targeting the next person, it might be an older manager, a veteran manager that's been out of the game for a little while, that's excited to get back in, that doesn't need the money, has a little bit of gravitas, but
is that Dusty Baker's music I hear?
Oh, we're bringing Dusty back. It's not just a Timberlake
rested and ready.
But otherwise, it's tough. We talk about guys, and we should just jump right into who some of the people on the current edition of the short list are. Skip Shoemaker is a popular name getting tossed around. And man, can you imagine leaving the dumpster fire in Miami to come to the dumpster fire in Cincinnati? Like, what kind of masochistic person do you have to be to want to leave? At least Miami's in Miami.
Some of the worst. Cincinnati's in Kentucky out here.
Yeah, we've already covered all this, Chad.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, good. Sorry, I was late.
We were pro t-shirts, I think. I was anyway.
I wasn't.
Also pro Kentucky. So yeah, I'll start with you, Chad. I don't say who do you think. There's no way any of us should know, but what are some names that interest you for this opening.
Well, Skip Schumacher's not one of them. I mean, what has he done other than be really gritty as a player to show that
2023 Manager of the Year.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Didn't David Bell win Manager of the Year in 2021 or something? He didn't. Did he not win one?
No.
So
there's a long list of managers that have won Manager of the Year that we would all call
that are out there. Yeah.
Jim Riggleman, is that who we're talking about? Listen, I don't know who I want. I don't want Skip Schumacher, but maybe that is because, number one, he's not exactly distinguished himself this year. But again, he's at Miami, and how much of that is his fault? I don't know. I don't watch Miami every day, or Florida, as we used to call them, those of us of a certain vintage. Schumacher's one of those guys that certain people loved when he was a Reds player that I could not figure out because he wasn't any good, and just because he was that classic, gritty player, and he rubbed me the wrong way. He may be good. I'll tell you who I think it's going to be, and I really truly believe this is who it's going to be, and it's Hall of Fame shortstop Barry Larkin. I really think it's going to be Barry Larkin, and I'm kind of going out on a limb there because I don't know.
Talk about somebody having no qualifications for the job.
Buddy, have you heard him talk about the Reds? He knows everything about baseball. Just ask him.
I'm gonna zag a little bit because I think Reds fandom by and large would be pretty annoyed by Barry Larkin being their manager. But if it's true that the analytics drives most of the decision making, maybe Barry's not the worst choice. Players are going to respect him. He can communicate with them, and the reviews of him when he's down in spring training and working with these guys are stellar. I don't necessarily think I believe that.
That's a coach.
I don't see how he goes from wanting to not work road games in the booth to suddenly being cool. Maybe it's a two-pronged approach. Maybe we get a road manager.
You get a home and away manager. I've said this too. You know what? If he got the job, though, it would be good for our friend Chris Welsh.
That's true. Hey, get back on TV more.
So
I like that.
I can't imagine that they would want to. For one thing, I don't know that the front office would want to put Barry in that job because they know they're going to have to fire the next manager, and then you got to fire Barry Larkin. So I just don't see it. And I'm the one that was saying for a while that I thought he was, but I think what Nate said is one thing. If he didn't want to do road games from the booth, he's not going to want to travel 7 months out of the year. I can't believe. I don't know who the right answer is either. Nate, you brought up Joe Madden. I think he's too old. I don't want a 70-year-old manager that's an anti-analytics guy.
Of everybody on this podcast, I didn't think you would be the ageist.
Exactly.
I tend to agree with you.
I don't have somebody that I would like. And
there's only
before we get into who, how much of the coaching staff do you think is going to be let go?
All of it.
Do you?
All of them. Yeah, I do. There may be a place for Benavides just because he's a Reds lifer. Let me go back to Barry Larkin for a second because I think that's an interesting conversation. I can't claim to know whether he wants to go to road games now. I don't know. Firing David Bell had very little to do with David Bell. He was not given the tools. Matter of fact, he had a ragtag team last year in first place at the trade deadline. That was the one season where you could say, he did a pretty good job that season. I've always said they've underachieved expectations anyway under his era. But firing him wasn't because he lost too many games. It just wasn't. And so in many ways, I see it as a PR move and a way to as a scapegoat, a way to deflect attention from the front office. And that's why I say Barry Larkin is the guy. If Barry Larkin wants it. It's a PR move. And yeah, it might make it harder to fire him sometime down the line. I saw what happened at Georgetown University, and they couldn't fire their legend until 2 or 3 years after their basketball program was in the dumpster. But I think the news clippings are going to be good. You know, Larkin likes to talk. He has good relationships, and you know what Nate says is he has for a long time now had a good reputation. Again, Bill says as a coach, and that's different than being the head guy. But he does have a good reputation from the player development perspective and helping out. But if this were 20 years ago and he was really making all the moves in the dugout and setting all the lineups like managers used to do, there's no way. But I think Nate's point that I hadn't really thought about it as much, which is that so many things are being coordinated from above that maybe it protects him from his worst instincts. I don't know. I think I'm looking for a PR move here, and I think it's Barry.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it from the PR angle, but that would make a lot of sense with what we've seen with this team. And I don't know that Phil has the the nostalgia that Bob often operated with. But we'll see. True. There's only one name out there that would like make me do backflips, and it's a veteran guy who they're saying is he left the game because of health reasons, and they're saying he's feeling good and perhaps itching to get back into the game. Got some ties to the area. That is Terry Francona.
Former Red.
The only name that's been mentioned that would make me legitimately thrilled to death. Everybody else is either whatever, or maybe I can squint and see it, but he's the only guy. Now, that depends entirely on A, his health, and B, a willingness. But I can't think of anybody better than that.
And affordability, and I don't think they could afford Terry Francona.
Well, they
maybe he's made enough money.
Well, I don't know if they will.
Okay. Let's not argue semantics here.
Well, some other names. Listen, I think, let me just
go ahead,
about Francona. He has the one thing that we have not seen from the Reds since what? 1995? Hiring a manager that has an actual resume. I mean, was Davey Johnson the last time we had a manager who had a resume before he came to be Cincinnati manager? And so I'm willing to try it. Well, Dusty, that's true. Dusty did have a background. So, all right, you just ruined my cool little thought there, Bill. Thank you.
Dusty didn't have a.
That's two in.
No.
That's 2 in 30 years, though.
Yeah.
He didn't, but he'd been to the World Series. But that's 2 in 30 years that had any kind of a resume. So I know another guy, Nate. I don't know if he's on the list you're going to ask, but I've heard his name tossed about. I don't want to hijack your show here, but what do we think about David Bell? I mean, David Bell. Oh, my goodness.
That would be a shocking move. The Reds have rehired David Bell for the 25 season.
A different David. David Ross.
Incredible. He would probably be number 2, my number 2 choice, I think. And I'm not like super pumped up about it or anything, but I can see I like former catchers. I like him sort of working with that pitching staff, having that background. I like that he would seemingly be extra motivated to take it to the Cubs after the way they so unceremoniously, I think he found out that he got fired when they announced that Craig Counsell had taken his job. He seems to be players love playing for him in Chicago, and he's big on fundamentals and the little things that we were so upset about under David Bell. The problem is he's also never won.
But is he? I think they're going to lean heavy into this idea of that, and it may be outdated at this point, but I think they're going to lean heavy into somebody that's a rah-rah, accountability. Somebody that's going to be hard on the players. Do you all think that's where they're going to go? That might be a factor.
I think
they talk about how they didn't hold players accountable.
I think
they'll walk the fine line.
I think David Ross is who they're going to hire. I've thought that since I started reading names. I don't know any. I don't know any that they will, but that's who I believe. I just have a feeling, and I have no reason to believe him over anybody else. But that's just my gut instinct. That's where they're going to go. I think they can afford him.
Mm-hmm. They could do a whole lot worse.
Chad and Nate and I were talking about. Do you remember? Did they ever announce how much David Bell's contract was for when they did an extension for him? Do you remember?
No, I don't. I don't think they ever did.
Yeah,
and of course, no one, pried.
Right.
No one asked those questions.
I just, I wonder how big an effect 2-year contract still sitting out there is going to affect the search for the next manager.
Certainly
they don't ordinarily pay someone not to work.
No.
And that will that go into that? Did you all talk about the press conference, Nick Krall's press conference?
Not yet. That's coming up.
Okay, all right, never mind. That's what I want to say there. So, but who else is out there? Any other names?
Well, let's run through a couple other of our viewer mail questions just to round this out. Hooper Powell says the Reds need a drill sergeant personality to run this team. Is Major Payne or Sergeant Hartman from Full Metal Jacket available? The thought of Major Payne managing this team brought a smile and a chuckle to my life. Jordan Salisbury says, gentlemen, thank you both for making another rough season tolerable. He was obviously speaking to me and Bill. Who is on y'all's short list of preferred managers? Jordan likes Joe Madden. We said Tito Francona. He mentions Kevin Cash, but he's still managing the Rays, so I don't know how they would work that out. Could we trade? Could we trade for Kevin Cash? He also mentions Scott Rowland. Says he thinks Scott Rowland would be a wonderful manager as well. So we can talk about that in a second if you want to. And then Seth Shaner says, how much faith should we have in Reds leadership to hire the right guy as manager? We kind of got to that last point already.
What about Lou Brown?
Lou Brown, bring you back. I love it. Cleveland wouldn't have much to say in their Twitter feed then.
That's right.
Joe Girardi is a name that's been bandied about quite a bit. He's the only one that I'm a hard no on.
Yeah.
He's known for being holding his players accountable, that's for sure. But I can't get behind a guy who got ran out of New York, got to Philadelphia, got ran out of Philadelphia, and as soon as he got fired, the moment he got fired, their season turned around and they went all the way to the World Series. I cannot think of anybody that would get me less excited than Joe Girardi. Also, random, who knows the legitimacy of it, but one of Late Night Reds' commenters said that his cousin played college baseball with Joe Girardi and they're buddies, and has on good faith that Joe Girardi is not interested in the job.
Well, all right then.
There you go.
Yes,
you think Benavides has got a shot, or do you think the Reds are just throwing his name in there to make him feel good?
That was a question I was going to ask. What do you think, Nate?
I think the price is right. But if they were looking for a PR move, that's a bad one. The guy's 0-2 as the Reds manager.
That's a good point.
I don't
never won as the manager of the Cincinnati Reds.
If you're talking about having seemingly lost the clubhouse and accountability and all this stuff, how can you give the job to a guy that's been sitting on the bench all year?
Because the things that Nick Krall was saying were
malarkey.
Just malarkey. That's the way some people would put it. I don't know. I'll say this. Freddie Benavides is the guy they would have given it to for the last 10, 15 years. So if they don't give it to Freddie Benavides, then maybe that's a hopeful sign that they really are going to go to different directions. I wanted to just do a search, an actual national search, and not hire somebody within the quote-unquote family, because the Castellinis have never done that for any key position. So this is an opportunity. If you want to try to get me to sort of change my mind about the way things are going and have a little bit of hope, do an actual search. Hire the actual best manager available, whether he's part of the family or not. That'd be an encouraging sign.
How nice would it be if Phil Castellini's like, this is my ship now. I'm the captain now. And he goes up there and does the right thing. And
the thing is, he'd come out with an eye patch and a hook. This is my ship now.
Well, what a story that would be if Phil Castellini's in charge, and all of a sudden we all have these terrible ideas about it because of the dumb things he said in public, but all of a sudden he turns out to be the greatest owner ever. He really goes all in and makes all the right decisions.
Opens the checkbook. What a story. Everything's analytical and perfect. Oh, wish it into existence.
I want to write that book.
All right, let's get into Nick Krall, some of these comments. So we'll start off with Bill and I talked a little bit, but we'll definitely want to get Chad's thoughts. Nick Krall said in his press conference, we're always going to be a small market club. That's not going to change. When you look at it, we're going to bring younger players up here, end up drafting and developing and bringing those players up, and we need those players to succeed in the big leagues. So my first thought was, as soon as I saw this, was get in front of it. Get out there right away. Let us all know that, it's all David Bell's fault. We're gonna stick to the plan, but we fired this guy, so it's all going to be okay. But what I found most interesting was that the Reds local media did not just take it quietly. And they didn't stop at the press conference either. So it was Jason Williams, of all people, the guy who has been licking Castellini boots for as long as he's been in town, he pipes up and says, and I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but don't you think their fans deserve some transparency after the last 30 years? Talking about the philosophical differences between David Bell and the front office. And then he had an article in the Inquirer a day or two later where he flat out says the Reds, and I quote, the Reds are a bunch of cheapskates. And does Schumacher want to leave one clown show for another?
Love it.
I mean, this
when
is
did
on
Jason Williams become the voice of the fan?
Well, the other person,
voice of reason.
The other one is Lance McAllister.
Yeah,
Lance has been a backer of the front office and the ownership as long as I can remember, and he's finally fed up and has gone over to the dark side.
It makes me wonder do these people just love Bob and were afraid to hurt their friend, and they don't give a rat's patootie about Phil Castellini? Maybe. So they're going hard in the paint, or maybe they know that Phil doesn't care and he has thick skin. I don't expect that that's the case.
Do you think that the move of Phil Castellini up really makes any difference to the way this team runs? I think Bob's still making the decisions. I don't think Phil's making the decisions, because in the announcement, they said the final decisions will be made by Bob Castellini. Now,
I think they're saying that, but
you think his health is so bad that they're being made elsewhere?
Yeah, I want to watch how I phrase this, but I think there's reason to believe that he's not making all the decisions every day, and so Phil's making a lot of them, I believe, and that's an interesting thought. This is the first time that we've seen local media really go at the organization. None of the beat right.
They're going at the Reds the way they used to go at the Bengals.
Exactly, and so maybe this is the tipping point. I don't know. Maybe they were giving them the benefit of the doubt last year because they said they had a plan, and it was never about 2023. It's about 2024, and 2024 went in the dumpster. None of the beat writers had really any criticism that I saw, which that's really not their job. I mean, it's not their job. Their job is to describe the games, but they're going to continue carrying water.
Well, this made me think. We talk about how we knew that there was a role for Joey Votto on this 2024 team, if nothing else, from a veteran leadership and influence standpoint. Maybe that sort of influence is also happening behind the scenes, and our old buddy Gordon Whitmire, shows up. Suddenly, the local media gets a little edge to him, gets a little cocky, gets some confidence. Was Gordo the catalyst for all this?
And then they hired David Ross, his old Cubs buddy.
Yes, that Chicago takeover. Oh my God.
The Jason Williams thing is interesting to me because no one, Lance McAllister has sort of backed the team, but he's not carried water for the Castellinis the way that Jason Williams has. Jason Williams, since he joined the sports section full time, I guess, has been over the top in how the Castellinis get a bad rap.
Yep. He's the one that came out with the puff piece as soon as Phil said his BS 2 years ago.
Yeah. He defended Phil Castellini. Right. And so when I heard that, I didn't know who said that, asked that question in the press conference at first. I only found out later it was Williams. And I heard the question. I was like, oh my gosh, somebody actually asked that in a press conference? And Nick Kroll looked like he wet himself. Someone asked him an actual question. He was
squirming.
Oh, it was great. But
in Nick Kroll's defense, he tried to walk around tough questions, but he faced it and did his best. His Nick Kroll best.
Oh, but Nick Kroll again. What we keep saying, Nick Kroll. Every time he opens his mouth, he just do your job and don't talk. Let somebody talk for you. But I don't know. I don't know if it's a new day, but I'm interested to see some of the media turning. Sorry, Nate.
Yeah. Well, speaking of comments, let's talk about what some of the players had to say. Tyler Stevenson was the first one that they brought up in front of everybody. He kept it political. He didn't cross any lines, which you'd expect out of Tyler Stevenson, that old sweetheart. Jonathan Indy, on the other hand, he had some things to say. He said, we're tired of losing. It's the same thing every year here. We just float around 500 and try to make the push, but we just don't have enough. We need to make a move. I know what it is, but I just want to say it to the media. And then somebody asked him in a Q&A, they said, you say the Reds need to make a move. Is what you're saying that the Reds need to spend? Yeah, could be, India said. Yeah, there's a certain thing we need to get. He also said we need to get someone that's going to be more aggressive and keep us accountable. We should be better in this clubhouse about keeping each other accountable, making sure you get your pregame work in, that you show up here or show up there, making sure that you take care of your body every day. Certain things like that. Maybe a little more old school, get some more fire and spirit. That whole showing up there, here, showing up there thing, I thought like really resonated with me because he wouldn't say it unless it wasn't happening. Where people just, you always hear about the guys that show up first and leave last. Didn't seem like that was happening around Great American Ballpark. Also, it's coming out straight out and saying that the Reds need to spend money. He was benched the very next day after he said that. Some say it was because he had a concussion. I don't know. I'm saying maybe Phil's putting him in timeout. But it was pretty telling that Jonathan Indy came out and had those strong words. Chad, what do you think?
Well, I'm used to hear if Bill sees this as well, but we heard for so long that David Bell was the player's manager and that he had their back, and David Bell would never criticize them publicly, and it would always say, "Oh, we're getting there, we're going to get there," and we're talking about how we need somebody to hold them more accountable. It's like from what Jonathan India said, maybe we all overestimated how much of a quote unquote player's manager. I mean, it may just be a Jonathan India issue, but maybe we overestimated just how much of a player's manager he was, and underestimated how much of their lack of, I think of defense and I think of base running, just the shoddy mistakes. How much of that might have been David Bell not holding their feet to the fire. I don't know. What do you think, Bill?
I agree with you. And we talked a little bit about this earlier. And it goes back to the promos that Ballings was running early in the season. His PR moves, and they were talking about how great guy Bell was, and how he always sits you down and talks to you. The other thing is, players have to be accountable to themselves too. And if there's a problem with this, it's not one guy. It doesn't sound like. It sounds like this is pervasive in the clubhouse. And that is a problem. And I guess they don't have anybody. And we talked to Nate, and I talked a little bit about this before you came on. Is that whether somebody went to the front office and let the front office know that there were problems in the clubhouse, and the Reds don't have a Joey Votto or a Scott Rowland or somebody of that stature that has the respect of the front office. And maybe they got to it had to get to the point where the front office couldn't ignore it anymore. And then their answer was to fire Bell. But we all know that that's not going to solve this problem.
I agree that at some point players have to hold themselves accountable. They're professional athletes, but a lot of kids here. And without a manager forcing them to show up early to get their work in, or insisting on, precision in practice, and without that veteran leader. They did. I think Bill hit you all talked about it, but Joey Votto not being in the clubhouse, Joey Votto, these guys, Ellie De La Cruz watching Joey Votto every day show up before him. This guy who's accomplished so much in baseball, but still being the hardest worker on the team. And again, I don't know that Ellie De La Cruz is not showing up. He may be showing up and working harder than anybody. I don't know that. I'm not suggesting. I'm just saying the kids on the team. Who's the veteran leadership here? They're really.
When it comes to comments in the media, it sounds like it was Luke Maley a lot of the time.
Yes.
He's been around for 2.5 seasons or whatever.
And my guess is they were counting on Candelario. That would be my guess, is that they were counting on Candelario when they
as fans, we were too. How'd that work out?
Didn't work out real well.
Well, another thing is, and what I was kind of reading between the lines here was that we shouldn't equate players manager, that term, with players liking him. It all seemed like the players liked David Bell. But good players want to be coached also. Who did Joey Votto thank in his Instagram post when he announced his retirement? Dusty Baker for teaching me how to be a pro. And there was nobody doing that. That's what it sounded like to me. You think about what our little birdies have told us about Joey's unceremonious exit. It looked to me like there's a couple guys with some iPads in the back making decisions behind closed doors and not talking to their guys. Not necessarily holding their feet to the fire, but not having much of a relationship at all. I'm sure all these guys liked David Bell, but that doesn't mean they don't want more. They don't need more. They don't see that they can't be their best selves without someone truly helping them get there, the way a Dusty did for a Joey Votto.
I agree.
Somebody else made some interesting comments. They talked to Ellie. Ellie, I didn't see it live. I just read it, so I don't know if they asked him in Spanish or English and what his ability to, how he wanted to convey his feelings. But he just said a lot of, there's going to be some changes. We have to be better. He's going to come back better. Everything you'd expect to hear. But Hunter Greene had, to me, what I thought was the most interesting of anybody. Hunter said, you have certain managers that were maybe pitchers, catchers, infielders, or outfielders, Greene said. Their focuses on certain players are different. Maybe that favors someone else more than the next person. Someone that's that's able to recognize that they can pour value into any player. That's important. Presence is important. Being able to establish holding players accountable. This was in response to being asked what they would look for or hope for in their next manager. Which sounds to me like the theory we always had about why we got such heavy doses of Kevin Newman and Kyle Farmer is that David Bell loved his utility guys so much that he spent all his time coaching them. And Hunter Greene says it right here. He wants in his next manager someone that coaches the whole team, not just some guys. If you're not coaching Hunter Greene, a guy who, had he not gotten injured, very likely would have won the Cy Young, not finished second, and still is going to get some down ballot votes. You're not coaching that guy. You're not talking to him about what it takes to be a pro. You should have been fired a long time ago. And the fact that he was willing to come out and say that was pretty telling to me. Sorry, Chad, go ahead.
No, it's okay. I'm sorry. You don't have to read too deep between the lines, do you? What India's saying,
no.
What Hunter Greene is saying. And these are guys that have been around longer than most. They're still kids, but they've been around longer than most anyone else on this team. You really don't have to squint too hard to see. There were some things going on in that clubhouse that maybe Bell deserved to be fired more than we realize. I mean, I still don't blame him entirely, but for the front office's failures to give him a team. But boy, that's some. I mean, they're not slamming him on the way out the door necessarily, but they're very pointed comments. Mm-hmm. Very interesting to me. Very interesting.
It didn't seem like they had to spend much time thinking about what they wanted out of a manager.
Yeah.
All right. Any last thoughts on this whole managerial search? Obviously, we'll be coming back as soon as we get news. We'll be talking about it. We'll talk about it on Late Night Reds as well.
Who's your prediction, Nate?
My prediction, I think, is David Ross. If I had to put money on somebody, he just kind of seems like the kind of guy that they would go for. Enough of he's familiar, but he's young. He's not going to cost a ton. And he does check the boxes based on what little I know about him. Accountability, which every single person they've interviewed, including Nick Kroll, kept saying over and over again.
You know who I think is a name that came up that I think is an interesting idea, though, is Miguel Cairo. Done some bench coaching, done well. Got the Hispanic side of the thing covered, and I'm not saying that's who I want. I'm just saying it was in reading his resume and stuff. I think it's interesting.
Very popular when he was a player here for that short period of time. Yep. Very, very popular.
Wouldn't work. Wouldn't fit the PR move theory. So we'll see. A couple quick hits before we. Yeah, please. Sorry,
last word. I'm sorry. Last word on the manager thing. I don't want Carroll because I want him to go to somebody that has no affiliation with the Reds. I want to go outside. But the last thing I will leave everyone with is, other than Dusty Baker, has any manager in the Castellini era gotten another job managing after leaving Cincinnati?
None.
Ooh. Doesn't that say something? So anyway, Nate, sorry, I wanted to.
That's a great point, Chad. I never thought of that. That's a great point.
I mean, it's a terrible point for all the managers.
True.
Stings for them.
No, actually, it's not, because they got a job that they probably weren't entitled
to. Probably true.
So they got an opportunity that they never would have gotten anywhere else.
So once he's fired from Cincinnati, Nick Kroll is going to manage the heck out of that Skyline chili. No, Dick Williams is the CEO. He might have to be more of a gold star guy. All right, a couple quick hits real quick. Nick Martinez has been far better than we ever could have hoped for. He's been fantastic. I've loved what I've seen out of Nick Martinez. Unfortunately, he has a player's option, but he did come out and say recently that he just spoke glowingly about his teammates, the city, And we'll see. Obviously, it makes sense for the Reds to pick up their side. Mutual option. I imagine that he will opt out. I just bring it up because I would love to see this guy in a Reds uniform next year. I think it's he's an underrated pitcher all year and just a huge, very, very valuable piece to this 162 game puzzle. Any Nick Martinez thoughts?
I agree. 3.5 wins above replacement. Number 3 on the team in wins above replacement. Mm-hmm. He's a Swiss Army knife. I mean, they've used him everywhere, and he's been effective everywhere. I think there's zero chance he's on this team next year.
That part I agree. Yeah, I mean, if I'm him, I opt out. I mean, it's tough to say no thanks to $12 million, but this is his last chance, maybe, to get a 3-year deal worth something. He's got to do it.
He'll get a 3-year deal or something.
Yeah. I mean, someone will give him that because he's been fabulous this year. He's really. I'm going to miss him if he does leave because man, he's been fun to watch.
Also, shout out to bald guys. Appreciate that. I like that about him. Speaking of guys with people's hair, shout out to Rhett Lauder, who has been nothing short of sensational in his extremely brief cup of coffee. Lauder threw 5 shutout innings in his 5th career start against the Pirates last week. He now has a 1.4 ERA in his short tenure, which is the 4th best ERA in Reds history since 1913 through a player's first 5 career starts. So,
wow.
Don't obviously small sample size, every caveat in the world. He and Jonathan India look like they go to the same barber, but he passes the eye test, man. Coming up in his full professional season, being lights out, he's so much fun to watch the way he commands every single pitch. Tyler Stevenson raving about how he can throw any pitch in any count. The guy is confident. I don't know. I'm excited about the Rhett Lauder era.
Yeah, and acquire a little bit of depth, and this pitching rotation looks pretty good again going into next year. A strength for most of the season until injuries really bit him. This year could be good.
It's interesting going into next season that Lodolo may have to really work hard to make the rotation.
Mm-hmm. We talked about this a couple months ago. In some ways, about how there's a non-zero chance that he finds himself as one of the odd men out. Until
that would be fabulous, actually. And I love Lodolo, but that would be fabulous if he's having to fight to make the rotation because he still has talent. I mean, there's a lot of good options.
Well, as we continue the theme of once again heading into the month of October with no Cincinnati baseball to care about, this is the last podcast we will do before the regular season is over. Oh, you guys know the Reds didn't make the playoffs? They didn't qualify? We didn't bring that up. Yeah, sorry. Other teams did, though.
Nate, that's not news.
Yeah, that was written in stone. Phil Castellini told us in the offseason. Are y'all going to root for anybody going forward? I think what I'm going to try to do here to keep it interesting for the next few weeks is do a little around the league stuff while the Reds are out of it and the playoffs are going on. Do y'all have a horse in the race? Anybody you would like to see? Any particular matchup?
Anybody but the Dodgers.
Yeah, fair enough.
I hate to do this because I'm one of these guys that grew up where you hate the other teams in your division, but I think I'm pulling for Milwaukee because Milwaukee is a quote unquote small market, and their success puts shows the lie in what Phil and what Nick Krall have said about the Reds being able to compete. So I kind of pull for a team like that has done it despite some limitations that the Reds also have. So. They're not that much fun to root for, though. I mean, the roster, there's not a lot of guys that I really love on that roster. There's a couple, but I don't know. That's probably where I go. What about you, Nate?
I've decided to go San Diego as my National League team. Support our boy Carlos Guevara, who's a friend of the show, and another somewhat small market team that sells out every single game and has all of the fun. There he is, former Billings Mustang, Carlos Guevara. In the American League, I'm taking a similar strategy to you, Chad. I want anything that the Royals or Tigers do. If they're the two that end up making it, let's go.
Yeah, the Royals is it. Because the Royals owner in the offseason was like, you know what? We got to try. We got to try something. Mm-hmm. And they did a bunch of things that I wouldn't necessarily thought were the right thing to do. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. But I love that story. An organization just says, you know what? We need to at least try.
Well, that's what the Padres did last year. I mean, it's taken them a year for it to work, but it's,
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the Tigers, who were in as rough shape as the Reds were halfway through the season, go on a pretty historic run. If you look at what they've done in the second half, to march their way. I think their playoff odds as of, it was like September 3rd or something. They only had like a 17% chance of making the playoffs, and now they hold the last wild card spot in the AL.
It's baseball.
The National League wild card gets a little funky. The Braves are a game back, and instead of playing in an off day on Monday and trying to make these 2 games up that they still have against the Mets, who are also in the wild card hunt, they're moving it to next Monday after the season's wrapped up, and that'll be something to watch. I'm sure that, it is. It definitely benefits the Braves. I got a lot of good Braves fans in my life, so I'm not going to say them making the playoffs breaks my heart, especially when the narrative around them was, the narrative around the Reds was injuries. The Braves, or you had pretty worse luck than the Reds, losing to Cunha Jr. and Spencer Strider. But it's baseball, so it'll all be fun to watch, and I will cry silent tears every game because we don't get to see Cincinnati doing it.
Yeah, I know. I was in Atlanta last night, and I was looking forward to going to see a game with something on the line this late in the season.
Yep.
So, but not a Reds game.
All right, fellas. Well, thank you very much for coming in here and covering this with me. And thank everybody for tuning in. Big time shout out to our Patreon family. It's patreon.com/RiverfrontCincy. We'd love for you guys to come hang out. Bill, any parting words before we call it a night?
I saw a guy on an airplane the other day was wearing a T-shirt that says, "My team has Ellie De La Cruz and yours doesn't."
I love that. I'm not gonna lie. I was hoping that you were just gonna go on a random story that had nothing to do with baseball or the Reds. See some guy in an airplane once. It's like the perfect way to wrap this up. Chad, anything you want to say to the folks before we hang up?
No, with all the nonsense that floats around this organization, we're going to wake up in February, March next year, and spring training's going to be around. And even if the Reds do what they typically do, which is very little in the offseason, we're still going to have some fun young guys. Matt McClain will be back. This pitching looks like it could be, we're going to come into next season with this same hope that we always have. If the Reds would just do a little bit, like Jonathan Lee said, just go do it. If they do what the Royals did, man, we would be through the roof. They're close enough that they could actually change the entire narrative around this. Will they do it? Well, we all suspect history is going to be our guide, but I'm still hoping.
Well, the good news is that next spring we'll just be able to rerun the same podcast that we did last spring. It'll be the exact same conversations. A little more Joey Votto talk sprinkled in. All right. True. Thank you, everybody. Please, if you haven't already, go follow us on all the places you can follow us. YouTube.com/RiverfrontCincy. We are at RiverfrontCincy in all the socials. And we'd love for subscriptions and follows to help this thing grow. We appreciate you guys. Thank you once again for coming on. And shouts to our patron saints, Adam Dunn and Lisa Alberto Bonilla. Shout out to Wayne Krenchicki and Eli Cass. And shout out to Miguel Cairo. For Bill Lack and Chad Dotson, this is Nate Dotson saying, so long, Cincinnati.